Welcome to the People by People podcast with me, your host, Laura Sutherland. This is the second guest episode of 2021. I was hoping to be on it and have lots of pre-recordings done, but you know what? January was just not a very good month for me. I just lost a bit of motivation, but now we're finally seeing signs of spring and sunshine and brighter days, so my mojo is back. And I'm delighted to welcome Claire Etchell, who is aka Naked PR Girl on all her channels. And Claire is talking to me today about social platforms, their evolutions, and what their USPs are. And we have some really amazing facts, well, not facts, I suppose points of discussion, like bones of contention as well, I would say. But first, let me welcome you to the show, Claire. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. I'm very excited. I think we're both quite passionate about this subject, so it's going to be a fun one, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think, well, firstly, let's just give people a bit of perspective. So Claire and I are currently running a Monday morning PR surgery for SMEs, and we're doing an Instagram live at 9:30 every Monday morning. And we were at one point transferring over to Clubhouse afterwards to do a room there and have a chat further. But what we figured out was that strength in numbers. So we're now doing PR surgery on a Monday, and then we're joining Rachel and a few others every Friday afternoon at 12:30 on Clubhouse for about an hour, where we're chatting all things SMEs, and we're getting lots of questions and stuff, and it's great. So Claire and I are here to support our own PR community, but also we are also supporting the business community, which is fab.
Exactly, and that's just actually a testament to doing something new like Clubhouse, and then finding that it worked better in numbers and being adaptable to what we were doing rather than trying to stick to something. We were like, okay, it was the touch early in the day, so more people were online later. And yeah, so I think I'm glad that we've given it a really good shot, and I'm glad we found something that works for us as well. So I'd give, other people should have a go to. Clubhouse is a great way.
I think that's half the battle, isn't it? Is tinkering with these things and really testing like different ideas and timings and different pieces of content. And we've even found that with the PR surgery, we were just kind of hanging out and just helping people. But now we have specific themes every week that we talk about, which people seem to tune in for. And actually today, for example, there were some really great questions this morning, which was nice to be able to answer and help people and point them in the right direction. But here's a question for you to kick things off, Claire. Do you like and trust Facebook?
I think that would be a no, wouldn't it? That's like having a cheating boyfriend who goes like, "Oh, I won't do it again, babes," and you're like, "Really though?" That's actually how I feel about Facebook. Yeah, it's like that untrustworthy, but ever-present sort of figure, isn't it? I feel like I'd love to trust Facebook, and I remember fondly first discovering Facebook and enjoying it was the photo sharing and the status sharing, wasn't it? And just the being with your friends and reconnecting with old friends, and it was all warm and fuzzy. And then they cheated. They did really bad things, and now it's grown to this enormous state where it's already out of the box, and now we're trying to sort of hastily shove it back in the box. I wish we'd had regulation enormously earlier. I think everyone was snoozing at that point, which is a big shame. And now kind of doing it retrospectively is always going to be harder. Definitely. But yeah, sorry, no, I don't trust Facebook. But I mean, this is the thing, right? I don't trust Facebook, but I use WhatsApp, and I also love Instagram. So I'm fooling myself with that story because I don't trust Facebook, but it owns everything. So it's a story I'm telling myself that as long as I'm not spending too much time on Facebook, everything's okay in the world. And actually, that's not really true, is it?
I think there's probably two things for me for Facebook. Firstly, there's what Facebook has done is Facebook has even worsened my work-life balance, because it's allowed business stuff like groups, pages that are being created to infiltrate into my feed, which when I'm looking at Facebook at night, I don't really want to see work posts. I don't want to see someone putting a report on and a comment about this, and if you're last to comment on it, you're seen as not caring, or you've not been responsive enough, or it's just too much of a competition. Like, so I literally just I have to ignore so much of what's on Facebook, and I'm only on Facebook still because I have to access for client pages, for analytics and for doing audits and stuff and evaluation. That is pretty much it, or use as a planning tool for audience insights. But the second part would be, and you touched on it, Facebook cheated. Like, there's a much bigger ethical conversation to be had around social media platforms and regulation, but also if you think of, like, traditionally we used to work with the media, print and broadcast media was what our bread and butter was 15-20 years ago. Nowadays, with the introduction of social and sort of last sort of, I would say predominantly for a lot of PR people, maybe the last sort of 5 to 10 years rather than maybe the 10 to 15 years that I've been on it. But if you look at that and you weigh up where people get their news and their information, and we know that the stats say that most people get it from social media or apps or influencers, and social media platforms are still unregulated, does that not pose like the biggest, most scary, ethical, data-driven, GDPR-tastic, scary question about what's actually happening? Because you don't see big blueprints for what Facebook's planning and what Instagram's doing and what WhatsApp's doing and Twitter and the other platforms. You don't see blueprints for them and how they're going to evolve.
No, you're right. And the speed, I think, of change is so rapid that you always feel like 10 steps behind, even just down to like the small things on the platform, like Instagram launching reels or Clubhouse coming along. You know, one minute you kind of feel relatively up to date, the next minute. And then TikTok, like TikTok has been enormous globally, catching on later here almost. And it just makes you realize how enormous these things are. And viral also, like they spread really really faster than COVID. So it does really make you it does make you, it is a fearful place almost, the internet, and where we are getting our news. Like the fact that it is unregulated is, it just is quite terrifying, isn't it? And the fact that different countries have had such different experiences as well. I mean, look at America hauling Mark Zuckerberg in, and you know, it's all quite big stuff, and it's very fast moving, so it's hard to keep track of. And even as just a human, just knowing what fake news is and what isn't, you're like trying to work it out from all these different
Yeah.
news sources, because I love a bit of Twitter for my news. But yeah, like you just half the time don't know what's real and what isn't, and people
Yeah,
are very quick to judge and jump on things these days.
exactly. I think, I mean, like, it might kind of I suppose for a high level outline of what we might be discussing is looking at these platforms and the opportunities on them. So, for example, you mentioned Instagram and Reels, but there's obviously IGTV, there's live, there are stories, there are then stories into highlights, there are posts on the grid. There's all that type of stuff going on. And then within Facebook, you've got your Facebook personal profile, there's pages, there are groups. And one of the things that we talked about was the sort of groups versus pages and the motivation for people to start one or the other. And my kind of thinking now is that these people start a page because it's a brand page, but people starting groups more from a community development point of view, people with similar interests. Is that your sort of take on it as well?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like you actually have to have almost a page to have an Instagram page. So I've known people, clients, not want to have a Facebook page, but if you want to schedule anything or see your insights, you basically have to link it up somewhere. So unfortunately for the whole world, you kind of are shoved into Facebook if you want to use Instagram. And then the second thing is yeah, when people are looking at community and wanting to have a place where essentially where your customers can talk together in a safe space where they know that, I don't know, their friends aren't going to necessarily see it if it's quite sensitive information, then groups have become like kind of increasingly important, I think, in that, because they can feel like they're talking to a smaller audience. You do feel like, you know, it's much more engaged, obviously, and people can actually answer each other's questions rather than it having to come from this kind of godlike figure who runs a page. You can also still regulate it, so you can add admins and questions to make sure you get through. But I've seen them, you know, work for all kinds of different things, and yeah, I think they can be sadly, like, because I don't necessarily love like Facebook in general, but I think Facebook have really nailed that format. I think they've made it quite easy for people to feel like they can chat amongst themselves, a bit like if you were just going to see your friends for lunch. It's got that kind of vibe for it. It's got that like, come on, then let's have a cup of tea or like get a glass of wine and let's all have a chat feel to it, which a page just doesn't have that feel. It's much more like, it just doesn't feel like you want to really share that much. You feel like it's a bit more public, and it is public, so you do want to be like careful what you share there. Whereas a group is slightly different thing, which I'm quite surprised that they've sort of been so popular actually, because I didn't think there was necessarily that space for it. But now you're like, it's quite obvious that people would want a space to talk to
Yeah.
each other, I guess, and that's probably where Clubhouse has also found its
Yeah.
momentum.
Well, I think that Facebook's groups they're given more of a sort of I think Facebook promotes the content more from each of them into feeds. So people are like, well, it's a no-brainer that if it's, a community element of shared feelings and discussions, then yeah, start a group rather than a page. But I think from like there's like obviously another issue that I have is the fact that so many platforms are doing the same things now. So like, Facebook now has rooms, which is kind of like what Clubhouse has, which comes back then down to audio, partly visual as well. And then I'm kind of thinking to myself, what differentiates these platforms and what is going to make people go from one to the other?
Yeah, it's actually fascinating, isn't it? Because I think I even saw that Twitter now does stories, and YouTube seems to have like a stories format as well. So,
Please.
but unless, I mean, you almost have to be enormously engaged in whichever the platform is to go to that minutia, as we know. Like, so for example, like you said with Instagram, there's about 5 or 6 different things you have to use on that platform to be a user of that platform and to probably grow on that platform. Because if you're not using Reels or you're not using IGTV or you're not putting anything on the grid, then it's probably going to view that you're not really, active user, so to speak, and you'll probably just stay as you are. So, but to use all of those things, as both you and I know, it's an enormous amount of work. It's an enormous investment into a social media platform like that we don't own. And Twitter, the same thing. So like you can't just dip in and out of doing a Twitter story, can you, or a YouTube story, or what, like, so it is like quite a big investment to go onto a platform and use it properly. Obviously we can all dip in and out of things, but the level they're expecting us to go to now, even like if you're thinking about Facebook, it loves it when you're streaming and you're doing lives and stuff.
Yeah.
But like that's a whole another kettle of fish, isn't it? So by the time you add them all together, I mean, I'm overwhelmed, and I like we work in it, so it does get quite a lot, doesn't it? So yeah, them all nicking each other's ideas isn't always the
And it
like an
takes
easy
away
answer.
from the whole point as well, doesn't it? Like it really does take away from the whole point of being able to have that sort of differentiation of choosing a platform. So like looking at that very specific point, I now kind of my kind of thinking and what I talk to clients about is, do you need to be on every platform? No. um do you have to have a presence on every platform? Well, if you don't take your brand name, somebody might, and you're not in control of it. So what do you use it as, like a placeholder, and then you point people to, like using Linktree or something like that, point them to one specific platform that you are using regularly. And I honestly think, for small businesses and small brands that don't have the expertise, don't have the budget, and don't have the time, there's no way that they can keep up with all the platforms using all different things and being everywhere and all the rest of it. But that then comes back down to the audience, that where is the audience based and where are they having the conversations? Because that's where the businesses and brands need to be, essentially, which has always been the case. But when they're all doing the same thing, maybe your audience is now quite disparate and it's like spread, over a number of different channels and platforms. You kind of have to, I think, choose where you're going to make your investment, essentially.
I agree, because I think there was a point, and then there was a real like an actual point where it was possible to take one piece of content and really just shove it actually on every channel. Like you didn't necessarily get the best engagement out of every single one, but it actually was fine. Like that wasn't a bad thing. But now it has got to a stage where you have to support that piece of content so heavily on each channel because the engagement has become more important than anything else, that if you're just chucking something through, it can just literally slide straight through the newsfeed, which
Exactly.
is a waste of everyone's time. So I think that has definitely changed over the years, hasn't it? That engagement, especially on Instagram, has become the key metric, really. You know, who's engaging, who's commenting, who's saving, who's sharing it. And to that point, it's like you've got to put so much effort in. I mean, I think I always talk about either I say 1 hour of engagement after you've posted something. Lorna looks, the influencer, says 2 hours every time you post a piece of content. That's a lot of time. That's a
Yeah.
lot of time. People are always surprised when I say that, because they're like, but that sounds like a lot of work. You're like, I know, because it is work. So just because it
Yeah.
looks really cute, it does all look cute, doesn't it? All looks so cute and fuzzy. It's not cute, it's business and it's numbers. And the more you give out, the more you get back. And
Exactly.
it makes it more clinical, doesn't it then? Like, but if you think of the 2 hours and then you need to go and spend 2 hours on LinkedIn, like you're just not going
Yeah.
to get anything else done, are you? So I totally agree with you. Like, pick your platform. You don't have to be exclusive to that platform or anything like that, but grow one thing, maybe move on to the next one, find your audience, make sure you're not wasting your time, because they are, if they're nothing else, they are time hoovers. And like you said, with Facebook and with everything else, it can bleed over into your personal life. So if you can try and keep it in some kind of order
Yeah.
and not let it eat you, that would be make it
I've
work for you rather than around.
I've got one client who swore by Facebook, like, Facebook was the best and Facebook was this, Facebook was that. And it turns out that the Facebook activity was not genuinely being engaged with by her customer base. And it was more of a, because it was being shared maybe from to a personal account and stuff, it was then being liked by friends. And that is like a false sense of people liking, because they're not your customer base. And if you're trying to attract new customers, then that's the wrong way. But when we changed the strategy and started focusing more time on Instagram, and we started doing, like, using more of Instagram's tools, like, lives and stuff, that's when more engagement started to appear. And so, like, the stats and stuff started to drastically change, which was fantastic. It doesn't ever, and I'll always add this into everything, it doesn't ever stop the end game being the impact. So what have you sold as a result of all that content and all of that time and everything else? What is the genuine impact being in your business and the bottom line? But I would say that it has cut down time and probably money from that client's point of view that did not need to be spent on concentrating so much time on Facebook and stuff. And even myself, actually, I've put placeholders on my business account and another one or two accounts that I run for pages, pointing them to Instagram or to Twitter, because I just don't use Facebook pages anymore. And as I say, groups really annoy me because they infiltrate into my personal time, which I now value more than anything during lockdown. Like, there has to be a
Yeah,
separation.
totally. And I think that's a good thing you say, actually, about being clear about telling people, I'm not necessarily here, but I am here,
Yeah.
because at least they know where to connect with you. Whereas, I think probably we should all do that more. But it's like you said, probably being clear, actually, in, whether it's your bio or whether it's on your page, like, I'm here to help and this is how, or like, sign up to my newsletter, or,
Yeah.
I am, live on, or whatever, like, you are live every week, aren't you? So there's definitely something about communicating, even if you're not somewhere all the time. I mean, I've got clients that use, for example, they have a company WhatsApp account, and
Yeah.
the WhatsApp number is like first, front and foremost on Instagram, because we just want to connect with you. It's easier for us almost to be like WhatsApping you or DMing you or whatever, and it's like we're quite open about that. And it's that you've got that chance in that bio or that page to really be clear about that, haven't you? Where you know you may, no need to say, like, we're not on LinkedIn, but you can just be saying, like, okay, come and find us, like, chat to us here is
Yeah.
quite important, I think.
Yeah, I think being clear and signposting people is important. But one of the things that intrigued me about what we were chatting about in the bigger sense of things is, like, obviously, like, the whole purpose is building a community, engagement, like we were talking about. And I think more so now than ever, people have realised the importance of community. Like briefly earlier on, we've been talking about the importance of having a community before you launch a podcast, for example, which is important because you've then got people like ready-made, engaged and ready to, have further conversations with you. But when it comes to platforms, like there's a real debate around like what platforms you use for building communities, but mostly in what I've been talking about in the last, I would say 6 months to a year, has been the ownership of the data. So for example, if Facebook, Instagram, Twitter disappear tomorrow, you don't hold any of that data unless you have managed to export like posts or something like that. But if you own the data, for example, names, email addresses, dates of birth, interests, business names, Twitter handles, that's all in your CMS, and that might be something as simple as like a MailChimp account. That's your data. You own that. And if MailChimp closes, that's fine because you can have exported the data by that point down into a CSV file. And you can use that. Whereas the fascination with always having like you're almost giving these platforms the data.
Totally. And I think actually probably the people who have really focused on Instagram and really won Instagram and doing really, really well, who have forgotten that will be, I hope it never comes to be a problem. But there are a lot of people who were big bloggers at the time. They're now huge like Instagram stars, but they probably haven't posted anything for a long time and they probably don't have a newsletter. And that's kind of okay when your income's coming from brand partnerships and sponsored posts and whatnot. But it just terrifies the life out of me because newsletters are your property, like you said, like not newsletter, like customer data. It's how you speak to your customers. And I always think of it as like you have to think about your website like first. It's your like home. You need to think about nurturing your website, looking after yourself, keeping yourself in shape, just making sure that that is all in order. And then so I always think about when I'm doing any kind of content, I always think website first, then you're creating the content on there, then you maybe put it on a newsletter, and then social media really historically would be kind of last because it would be the place where you find that everything's ready, or your assets are ready, your press release has already gone out, whatever, and then that would be like that final push of like, okay, we're live now. Whereas I think these days it's thought of the other way around, isn't it? But if you take the traditional sense, you're never going to forget those building blocks because they're there for a reason.
Yeah.
But it's ever so tempting, like we're all in the same boat. It's ever so tempting to see like the shiny new toy and want to go play with it and forget the essentials. And it's only, like you said, if anything ever does happen like that. Or the other example is Facebook changed the rules, didn't they? So at one point, if you were a page and you were posting something, you were a company, a lot of your audience would see it. And now the numbers are tiny. Like no one sees it unless unless it's gone off like a rocket for some reason, or if you're putting money on it and advertising. They haven't made those kind of swift changes yet on Instagram. You can still do quite well as a brand using it organically. But there might become a time when a lot less people start to see your stuff, you start to stall, and then you realize you're going to have to pay to play. Or pay more to
That's
pay.
already the case, Pings.
Yeah,
Definitely. But if you
I just
think
don't
in
think
your
it's that
email,
heavy on Instagram yet, because I think I don't think it's as heavy as what they did with the Facebook platform, because that just went from like normal to like nothing. So I don't think it's been as drastic, because they're also still wanting you to shop on Instagram, which I think is another sort of trend coming through.
They're trying harder on that, and I think that's a good thing, I think, because it's from a user experience, you're able to click through, and obviously they're monitoring the types of content that you're looking at and suggesting things, which is actually, for me, that's okay, because it's all relevant stuff, because I've clicked relevant brands only type thing. But you touched on Facebook and the algorithm changing and Instagram algorithm changing. And that's obviously had an impact on reaching like a majority or larger number of followers or page likes, etc. Which actually they're doing away with likes now, and they're only doing following. But that still doesn't give you the same opportunity as an email. An email is a direct, isn't it? It's a direct email, a direct communication from you to somebody. and personalize it and, you know, customize it and make it everything it wants to be for that person. You know, let's not talk about email marketing, because I love email marketing. It's a huge opportunity, hugely missed opportunity, but you can't do that with Facebook. You just can't. You can't guarantee that they're going to see it, or you can't guarantee they're going to own it and open it and do stuff with it. Whereas if you've got that, you know, that email, and you might have like 10 different links to different products, services, recommendations in there, that's that opportunity, you know, for someone to go and click all those links. You just can't do that with Facebook.
No, and then like you said before about the data, like that is such exciting data, isn't it? When you find out how many people opened it, who
Yeah.
they were, what did they click on, and that like really informs things. Like if people clicked on something you really weren't expecting them to, you're like, oh, fantastic! Like I didn't realize I'll do more of that, because I think I've had that in newsletters where people have clicked on nothing, and then right at the bottom, I'm like, oh, that throwaway thing at the bottom, and yeah, the bigger the company, the better the, you know, the more automation you can do, the more fun stuff, personalization, like you were saying, like you can follow up with things. It's kind of infinite, and it's a brilliant tool. I think it is really overlooked these days, and I think people feel like unless they're like Marks and Spencers, what are they going to do with a newsletter? And it's like, actually you can still have, as like Seth Godin would say, like the smallest viable audience, isn't it? Like you can still have that small engage. This is somebody who opted in, or bought something from you, or you know, it's much more engaged than somebody who just clicked like follow on Instagram. It's a different
It's
level of,
quantity. It's the quantity aspect is what people used to get drawn to, but it's now much more about the quality, and people are starting to understand that. And that needs to be, but again, if you're, you know, if you're working with someone like you or me, we know how to evaluate properly with things like that. We know that it's about the impact and not about the numbers of followers or just the reach or whatever. It needs to be about, well, what journey did they go on after that, and did they go through to your website to complete the sale, or did, you know, the with your cart reminders and stuff like that, did that come back, and then after it did the second reminder, did you then go on to buy? And I think that's the thing, like it's so much more about integration nowadays. It's not just about a social channel or just about having a website. It's about everything working together,
yeah,
absolutely everything.
harmony.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that interests me about some of the, and I would maybe call them, the things I've come across is quite gimmicky, like the subscriptions, the membership type things, not subscriptions, membership things that people will take you away from the likes of Instagram and take you onto a secret Facebook page that you pay £15 a month to be part of. And there's some guru that's behind it that's like, you know, will give you access to this once a month and that the next thing. Now, both you and I have done research in this area for client work and for other interests. But what interests me is the monetization side of things, because we briefly chatted before we started recording, and you had talked about Facebook introducing some new sort of star concept. Do you want to quickly give us a wee outline of that? What it
Yeah,
means?
exactly. Speaking of gurus, it kind of is a bit of a guru. There's a guy called Rob Moore. I think you might be following him as well, and he's called himself a disruptive entrepreneur. So he's all about kind of teaching people how to scale up their businesses, and it's him. So that I've noticed it on. So I think he's one of the sort of first people in the UK to be allowed to use this star system, and people can give him these stars. So say he might be on a live streaming and say, you know, if you give me 500 stars, I'll give you a shout out. And some, you know, people will give him 500 stars, and it's worth, I think I found out earlier, it was 0.01 US dollars per star. So yeah, you can see how people are quite enjoying that. And then you kind of get called, like, I think you can have a monthly fee as well, and you get called a supporter on that program. So it's quite interesting to see.
Do you think that's motivating for people to get a title as well, like a
Well,
supporter?
I must say, I would rather do it and not have the title. But I think it was when I first looked at it, I think it was something ridiculous like £3.49 or something like that to be a supporter each month or something. So really, like literally the price of a cup of coffee kind of idea. And then the idea was you get the access to, like, I don't know, the WhatsApp groups and the whatever. So is that like that layered like reason for being really a fan, I suppose? And that's where I suppose OnlyFans has got a big foothold, and Patreon has been become such a big player, because people really now, they want to monetize the advice they're giving out. Or, you know, if you're a creator and you're creating lots of content, and you're like, well, actually some of this is pretty bloody good content, how can you put it behind a paywall? And I think we're really moving to like the world of sort of free content. We've, you know, we're almost like too much of it. We're almost like we're immersed. But if it's really good content, and
It's
you really believe in someone, and you want to stick to them, and you want to, you know, you feel really invested, then I suppose this is where we are like, okay, how do we monetize this? And I suppose Facebook again is really trying to take hold of that bit. I mean, Patreon is a fantastic thing, but I guess the automation side of that might be quite a bit harder.
it sounds though like almost they're taking like a crowdfunding model, because essentially that's what you're doing. You're you know, maybe the end game is slightly different, but you're pledging money essentially for something. This time you're actually giving it, and then in return you're getting something that's at a sort of various levels. Like if you pledge like £5, you'll get this t-shirt. If you pledge £10, you might get a t-shirt and a pen or a baseball cap or whatever. But what's most intriguing is the fact that if they're giving $0.01 for every star, this sounds to me like cryptocurrency, where you're then giving that back in some way, shape, or form, because I'm assuming it's going to be sitting on like a Facebook account or something like that, where it's basically just like it's money that's going back and forward that you're not even actually seeing, because you're just trading it on that one platform. Is that right?
It's quite well, I mean, this is the thing. I think it's in quite an early stage, and I think they've just given it to what they're trying to do, I think, is make the big players on there do streaming and be live a lot. So I think they've gone for people like, as we were saying, gurus who really like doing that and are really good at that. And then as they're on there, are giving it the big like guys, if you're enjoying this, I'm doing this for free. Da da da. So I think that's
Upselling.
yeah. But I don't know how much visibility we have of what's going on behind
Yeah.
the scenes, so to speak. But yeah, it's going to be.
I'm always just so wary of all that guru stuff, honestly. Like traditionally, if you know you need service or help with something, you would go and seek out that right person, and you would get the advice or whatever, or you'd go and learn yourself if you need to. But I've just seen so many like skeptical like setups of join my club, and you know we'll give you like once a month access to this, and I'll send you my personal email for that, and you're just like, what? I don't know, very skeptical of these things.
I know what you mean. The thing I do like about Rob Moore though is that he's a big advocate of doing all your social media at the same time, and I think I've talked to you about this before, but it's something I think it just sounds like the best idea ever. Like if you can get like your two phones with like your Facebook Live and your Instagram Live at the same time, and you can be recording it for a podcast, and you're doing it for YouTube, you know, if you can get to that level of like tech, whatever that's called, tech paradise or hell, depending on your viewpoint, if you can get to that, then you are literally knocking it out of the park. You can be like, yeah, waking up in the morning, doing 1 hour of it, like blasting it all out,
Yeah.
and then you kind of done, aren't you? So I'm definitely drawn to that like idea of being able to do things in a really sort of
But then
concise.
I think it just I honestly think that sort of thing just takes time. Like you need to invest time to set it all up. There will be a small monetary element for streaming and platforms and making things work together. That will probably sort itself out and sort of, you know, probably in the not too distant future as people start to do that. But I mean, like my podcast, like if I record it, obviously we're actually recording visual as well at the moment. And it's recording audio, but I like to just use audio, but the audio automatically then also goes onto my personal blog, and it goes on to my my Aura blog as well, and automatically just no, it's not the Aura blog, there's a page for it, but it automatically does all that because I spent time doing that in advance. And if I hadn't, then there wouldn't be those updates, or I'd have to manually go in and do it, and that just takes like time to do it, and it's just like quite uninspiring, to be honest. But I think yeah, But coming back to that cryptocurrency stuff, that's moving into like this sort of way that I see these platforms, like, you know, using AI, storing like virtual money essentially, and that's how you probably will be able to start to buy products as well, eventually, once the intelligence sort of builds up and once the public or users start to grasp onto the ease of it as well. I mean, think about lockdown, how many people don't carry cash now.
Oh my God, never.
People
I
don't
don't
want
even
to
carry
carry
my
cash.
card anymore. I just have my phone.
Yeah. And for people like my mum, like she's really skeptical about just using her phone, but you know, she has like her card and her phone, which is great. But I think even just her, like her not having cash is great because, you know, someone in an at-risk category as well, you're like, no, I don't think you should be going to the bank to take cash out.
Yeah, you don't be handling anything. You don't need
No,
to.
anti-bat your hands. Oh, but I think this
Money.
all just reinforces the importance of owned content, thinking it through, like where your audience is, what value it's going to be, and you need to start thinking about the inevitable of the future of platforms evolving, platforms not having USPs. Some platforms might still have USPs, and also things like, you know, AI and cryptocurrency and what that might look like, because whilst we can't predict it, because as I said before, there's no blueprints for these social giants, but whilst there's no blueprint, we still know, like, and can probably predict the way that things are moving in terms of how we're seeing things evolve at the moment. And it would be great to obviously revisit this conversation in another year's time to see what's been introduced, who's closed down, who's moved on. But yeah, I think owned content is a missed opportunity, and I keep talking about it, but owned content and integration.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with all of that. Yeah, I think we're living in a time when it is so fast moving that you can just end up spending most of your time worrying about what reel or TikTok to do. And that's like more at the that's more at the sort of end user level. And what you need to be doing is making sure that everything starting from the top down is in order. And I think that's what you're great at, always thinking strategy first, and making sure that everything then fits into that rather than running after platforms and running after likes and running after things like that, because they're not going to pay your bills and they're not going to build your business that's sustainable and long term. um, Unless you're an influencer. What am I saying? Like possibly might, but then even they will have a strategy. Like even if you're an influencer and you've got over 1 million followers, you will have had a strategy along the way. You'll be reviewing your numbers. You will know
But
what works.
that's the thing though, that's their job though. Like that's their single job. Like, and if they didn't do it, I would be really quite like disappointed, upset, and like how did you do it without having a strategy? Because they're the people that spend all their time posting and commenting and responding to people and creating the content. Like, really quickly, actually, before we finish the podcast, did you see the massive blow up with Zoe Sugg and what happened in the Mail? And then all the other, like the Times and stuff followed suit about content that she had put on her website, which was about, I think it was about sex toys. And unbeknownst to her, a college or something like that had gone and used part of her website as part of their curriculum. No, it wouldn't have been a college, it'd have been a school. And they've used part of her website as part of the curriculum that she didn't know about. And this story broke this, and this is where whole misinformation and disinformation rubbish needs to get really sorted out. They basically started pointing the finger and saying that she'd lost this and that and the next thing, and she'd been taken off the curriculum because of this not irrelevant, inappropriate content for under 18s and blah blah blah, which actually then gave her more ammunition, because she came back and said that's utter nonsense. Like, I didn't even know about this curriculum. The all of the newspapers that talked about it were all the big ones. They just spouted rubbish and they hadn't even checked the facts. Can you believe that? They hadn't even checked the facts. Unbelievable. But she used social media, and particularly Instagram and other influencers that she's connected with, to address the situation, which I'm glad about, because that was not fair that she started getting her finger pointed. But she's managed to turn the situation around, And she's now highlighted the fact that, you know, younger people are not, these conversations about sex toys and things are not being discussed at a younger age, which she reckons they should be. Again, this is a whole different conversation for another day, but she has managed to turn the situation around and actually start a debate around education and older children in schools, and what they are being educated about, and is it relevant to today's life.
I feel like what Zoe Sorga's, it is Zoe Sorga, I said that right? Yeah. What she's had. Zoella, exactly. So what she's had all along has been this thing where she's been so high up in terms of like her status, and the papers cannot help but love it every time anything happens, like she steps out of line. And in a way, it's always been our British media quite terrible way, really, like start pointing fingers, I guess. And like when she did her book and they were gunning for her because it was ghostwritten, and it was like, well, of course she had some help writing a book. She's, you know, that's not the, anyway. And it just seemed really out of kilter. Like she was very young at that point when she wrote the book, but they went after her because they were saying she'd got used a ghostwriter and not said so, and this, that, and the other. And you're like, wow, like what is this anger we've got here? Like you're just a YouTuber, kind of like, you know, that, I don't know, it feels a bit generational sometimes as well, perhaps, that like, oh God, they're just, you know, YouTube stars. So a bit of misunderstanding what they even, you know, there is a job and it has got a monetary value, and you can't just write people off because you want to, perhaps. But I'm really glad that she's using her status that way. That's really encouraging that she's not taking, because it must be quite hard to stand in front of so many people all the time and stand up for yourself, I think.
No, she's that was a completely by the by, but I just wanted to give that a shout out because she handled it really well, and I'm glad that she didn't shy away from it and ignore it. And you know, I don't know if she has any, she must have PR people that work with her, but
in some ways though, influencers are great people to look at for how to deal with or marketing in general. Like I quite enjoy looking at how bigger influencers, you know, launch big products or launch collaborations, or start introducing something, like teasing something beforehand, or do deal with crises. Like I think there's obviously bad and good, but I do enjoy like taking some cues from them, because they've really learned a lot, and like you said, they're immersed in it all the time. This is their main platform, so you can
they're being human, and that is the thing that like a lot of brands, inverted commas, and you know, organizations, when they're handling crisis stuff, they're not humans. She genuinely was like, you could even tell by the way it was written, she was hurt, she was upset, she was annoyed, frustrated. And she did name the papers that it was in, because she was actually shocked herself that they hadn't even bothered to check the facts. And I just think that shows you the difference now between, you know, particularly as, you know, even when newspapers are doing stuff online, some of the stuff takes 2 or 3 days to appear. Like these people are not rectifying situations as quickly as she can rectify her situation or handle it. And I think that was a really good thing for her to do. So well done, Zoe. I don't think you'll ever be listening to this podcast, but just in case you ever do. Good. Claire, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much. I know it's your birthday next week, so we're not doing our PR surgery. It's Claire's birthday and Valentine's Day, everyone. And it may be a special birthday, or it might not. So we'll be back with the PR surgery on the Monday, the 22nd of February. Probably just about timing, actually, as this podcast is launched. But thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you to Claire for the fab conversation and some of the brilliant points that you've made today on social giants, evolution, and now monetization.
Thank you.